All right, we're continuing in Romans. We're up to chapter 6, verse 12. That's Romans chapter 6, verse 12. We need to keep in mind where we started. Where we started was talking to the two sides about their different issues. So while he's also talked about the issue of sin just before this, we should not be letting go of the fact that he said, hey, you both have problems. One side, you're holding and falling back into a tradition that doesn't really accomplish anything, especially because you practice that tradition really without focusing on God. You did the works to do the works as though the works accomplish something. But then there's the other side. And that is, okay, you've accepted God's grace. You've accepted his offer of forgiveness of sins, but also of life. A life that goes beyond what we have here and now. Now the two of you need to come together because both of you have something to bring to the table. And both of you have something that needs to be left away from the table. Don't forget that. Just because what came just before this verse, or these verses, was about the idea of letting go of sin, putting off our old man of sin, because that first is still in play. So starting with verse 12, therefore, do not let sin reign in your mortal body, that you should obey in it in its lusts, and do not present your members as instruments of unrighteousness to sin, but present yourselves to God as being alive from the dead, and your members as instruments of righteousness to God. For sin shall not have dominion over you, for you are not under the law, but under grace. All right. Have dominion over you. They got that. Because back then, either you were one of the ones on the top of the heap, or you were everybody else. And by the way, almost everybody was everybody else. So they understood when somebody has dominion, somebody has the authority, you don't have an awful lot of say in life. If sin has dominion over you, you don't have an awful lot of say. If you're addicted to drugs, you don't have a lot to say. You're addicted to alcohol, you don't have a lot to say. You're addicted to gambling, you don't have a lot to say. You're addicted to sex, you don't have a lot to say, because you have allowed something else to have dominion. We get that on the negative extreme. Do we get that on the positive? Who's supposed to have dominion? God. Do we give God the same kind of dominion that we know sin will demand? And unfortunately, I think the answer is no. And I believe both sides needed to hear that message. Both the Jews and the Gentiles needed to hear, okay, you've made the change. You've accepted God's grace, but it comes with a price. He's to have dominion over you the same way sin used to. Now, here's the benefit. His dominion is for your benefit. He desires good for you. Obedience to him isn't the drudgery that obedience to sin is. Because addiction, doesn't matter what kind, you suffer. You can't get by because you need that hit sooner and sooner and sooner. And when you don't have that up, you're stressing, you're dealing with anxiety, you're dealing with chemical withdrawals within your body that you just so can't fulfill on your own under normal means. That's a nasty. With God, there isn't necessarily, unfortunately, the nasty when you're not submitting to his dominion. Or is there? When we do not submit to God's dominion in our lives for leading and growing our families, what do we get? We get broken families. We see that throughout the Old Testament. When God did not have dominion in people's lives spiritually, when the only thing that seemed to count for David was David's personal relationship with God, what do we see with the rest of his family? We see the terrifying. Because how far did David have God's dominion go? As far as it directly addressed David. If that's as far as we take God's word, we could become like David on the positive side. We could, because of our own focus, our own inward direction with this, get on the right footing with God relative to ourselves. Who here wants to lose their wife, their husband, their kids spiritually? The answer better be nobody. But if we don't want that negative, just like the addict doesn't want the negative, we've got to give the right dominion to God in our lives all the way. Because giving it only part of the way hurts. And maybe if every time we didn't do the dominion thing right relative to our families, relative to our neighbors, relative to our co-workers, if a big hammer came out and whacked us on the toe or whacked us on the thumb, and we felt the physical pain, then we would respond rightly because we would want to avoid that physical pain. For myself, I've got one area I will always feel the pain with. That's with kids. If I have anything in my pocket, monetarily, and there is a donation situation that is specifically to help kids, and I know how that money is getting spent, that it's actually going to be going to help the kids, if I make the mistake of walking by that bucket or whatever, everything that's in my pocket goes into that bucket. I can't get 10 steps away and my gut is killing me because I know their need. I know the consequence of not helping a child grow in a healthy manner. We see it throughout our society on the spiritual side. And we know the physical need at that point is also important. Like I said, I literally have taken and turned around, opened up the wallet, and just dumped. Because for me, that issue is one of those gut wrenchers. I feel the pain. Because I've invested myself in thinking that way. Now, I got to explain that a little bit. There are two other things I have invested in the exact same way. Coffee and chocolate. If my life is going miserable at the time, if I am stressing out to the max, I will walk out of my office at the university, go next door to that itty bitty hub, buy myself a sugared up coffee and some kind of whatever with chocolate in it, preferably not a Hershey's. And I will come back to my office, sit down, open that cup of coffee, open that container of chocolate, take one bite, take one swig, whoo, and I calm down. Because I purposely, intentionally thought about that. This is doing something okay for me, other than the fact that I'm a little bit too supersized, and I need to do less of that. That can turn me around immediately because it doesn't involve my brain. If I had to try to think through something at that moment, I'm not going to succeed. Giving me the coffee, giving me the chocolate, I will mentally, it's just boom, a physical thing happened. I feel the sugar. I feel the extra little bump from the caffeine. Okay, we can breathe, we can go forward. Because I have done that as a tie the physical to my mental. I can sort of do that, with a cross. I used to have the necklace that was the 2 spiked nails. I have a bracelet that fits me a little bit loose and I'm afraid of losing it, that's got a cross on it. That bracelet's also made out of, well, it's made out of steel. The necklace, I think, is made out of pewter. But when I put those things on in the morning, and I haven't been doing that and I need to figure out what I can do different, first thing in the morning, that reminds me, whose am I? Dominion. And when I would go throughout the day, I could reach out, put my hand around my wrist. Whose are you? Okay, a physical. I never quite got with that with the necklace. That was too girly for me. So reaching out and grabbing a hold of the necklace didn't quite work. But grabbing the bracelet reminded me, whose are you? Who's got this if I was stressing? So that one I need to work back in because I don't need more coffee and chocolate. Reminding ourselves, whose are we? And I mean that on the positive side. Because who's got us? God's got us. And we should be thankful for that. And when we're facing the stress, remembering who's got us should be that encouragement, should be that calming, should be that reminder. You know what? Bigger than the bad I'm facing is the God I serve. This dominion concept should not be taken as far as the dominion God should have over us, the negative way that sin's dominion had over us. Because God's dominion is for our good. So when we're reading 12 through 14, for sin, verse 14, shall not have dominion over you, for you are not under the law, but under grace. What's his dominion? His dominion, as part of it, is grace. And like I said, when we think his dominion, we should be thinking about what, in this case, grace means in our lives. It means that thing we should be saying, thank you, Lord. Because without you, none of this is doable. Okay, I've done what I normally do. I've talked too long. What are some thoughts here? Thoughts are you all want chocolate and caffeine.
And Paul really, he's trying to bring about the doctrine of sanctification as well.
Yes.
Growing into.
He is beginning that. Because, like I said, we start out with what are your problems and let's get the table cleared. Now, he's starting the slow roll into sanctification. He doesn't hit sanctification quite as hard in Romans as he does in some of the other letters, because in Romans it's first, let's get you both working together. And what should be uniting you? God's dominion. What do you both need? God's grace. If you're both agreeing to this, let's move forward. But you're right. He's beginning the concept of sanctification. Romans does not go nearly as deep as some of the other letters will, because in the other letters, persecution has hit full swing. And in the other letters, when you're thinking about facing persecution the way they did, you can understand why reinforcing the ideas of sanctification became that much more important. And as long as we're jumping off topic just this little bit, I don't care what your thoughts were about Rush Limbaugh. He had one important point to tell the people of today. Y'all need to wake up and realize you think this is bad, you don't have a clue. We need to wake up, not the way he was talking about people dealing with finances and stuff, but realize spiritually, if we think the way the U.S. is heading right now is bad, truth is, we don't have a clue about the nasty that other nations are facing the world over. If we don't get it in gear, under his dominion, striving for his sanctification, we're going to see exactly what David saw in the rest of his family, because we're not leading with that right example of what it means to submit to the dominion of God, not just in the easier stuff, but in the, all right, let us become the clean vessels he destines us to be, as opposed to, I'm not the too bad vessel. Go ahead, Jim. I talked again too much. Thank you for the point about sanctification, because yes, this is...
I find Paul here dealing so much with, okay, here's the law.
Yep.
And he's following Christ, trying to talk to them in these scriptures. They've had so many years of history under the law.
Right. But the reason why he doesn't press hard into sanctification in Romans is because he's trying to separate that kind of thinking, obedience to an activity, and direct towards obedience, dominion of God. So that's why sanctification doesn't hit as hard in the text of Romans as it will in his later letters. Go ahead, Bobby.
It's pretty complex, but the fact is that Israel was accustomed to God doing physical things for them, and them in return doing physical things. This is that period, the maturation period, in which God is bringing us to eternity, as opposed to the temporal.
Yep.
And they're having difficulty with it.
Yes.
Just like we do, to understand that we are eternal beings and that there are certain requirements.
Right. And okay, let's jump to the university. Not University of Florida, but where I just got my first degree from, Heritage. One of the biggest impacting classes for everybody that graduated with me was our class on ethics. But for the wrong reason. The class we all thought was going to be most impactful was on spirituality. And those of us that were in that class early on, it's like, yeah, let's get doing. And it took me about a year and a half, 2 years of going through that when I was over at Keystone Heights to realize it was all going woof, 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 woof. And I was getting frustrated. And then I hit a book on broken vows, divorce. They hit on 7 different issues as far as reasons, wrong reasons obviously, why the vows got broken. 3 of them were really strong ethics issues that you read it and you're thinking, well, everybody in the church knows this, right? And it took a bit for that to sink into me that, one, Broken Vows is a book about this taking place in churches. The people that book is writing about is counseling Christians who have broken their vows. It is Christians that had those 7 different issues. It is Christians that had 3 basic underlying ethic issues of, well, I didn't do anything wrong to her, so it wasn't that bad. I didn't kill anybody. It wasn't that bad. It's just a sin. And just a sin has no more significance than 3 letters. When I preached 3 sermons about the ethic issues that I saw in that book, that's when you saw people pulling toes back in the congregation. And I was sort of shocked because you could see it on their face when it's like, what? And I'm like, oh boy, this is not supposed to be a what moment. Except, obviously from that book, it was a what moment. This semester was the semester that 5 of us that graduated took the ethics class. Every single week, we hit on a different issue of ethics. Every single week, we saw the world pounding on the door. No, we saw it within the congregations we've seen and worked with and realized, oh boy, this is stuff that is real issues that on one level you think about it, this shouldn't be an issue. And on another level, okay, the world, because we haven't given dominion to God, has been pushing in gently, just sort of leaning in a bit, and leaning in a bit, and leaning in a bit, until the world is standing right there in the middle or right up front. And when sermons are about what's mostly good, because it's a platitude sermon with a little bit of scripture mixed in, it's understandable. It's not just out here, it's up there. Those 2 things combined made the entire semester on ethics. Rubber meets the road in the congregations. And at the end of it, everybody was saying, you know, I thought I knew what was the most important class I took until this semester. And now I realize we got a lot of right down to the basic root of things that's got to be rebuilt from the ground up. Because you can't make the assumption, well, they're Christians, they've been in the church X number of years, they should know by now. It's in the pulpit, it's in the songs, it's not in everyone. And so the sanctification part, jumping back to what you'd said, we have a problem that when we heard the passage, work out your salvation with fear and trembling, we applied that to the world. Because if we're baptized, that's not a part of our salvation we're working out. But what do we hammer on? Baptism. If we're following God's word, what should we be working out? Being a good person? You'd hope that's the natural part. What is it we're working out? We're working out the sin in our lives. We are working to become sanctified vessels of service for God. Back in the first couple of centuries, that passage was treated like, okay, what am I going to do to make sure sin hurts enough that I'm backing off? Well, I was looking and lusting. But nobody knows that. I know that. Okay, what am I going to do to make looking and lusting when nobody else knows it hurt? Okay, when I do it, I am going to make sure then that I give 40 hours of service in the next 2 weeks to pick my project. I'm going to be working in the soup kitchen. I'm going to be working, helping out with families that have to do yard work and stuff that they haven't been able to do because they don't have the time, they don't have the money, they're working 3 jobs. I'll be going over, I'll be mowing, I'll be cleaning up, I'll make their yard look good, I'll paint their house, I will do. I will give up an extra X number of time that I don't have to spare in my life, so that the next time I look in lust, and the first thing that hits my brain is going to be, are you ready to give up another 20 hours? Are you ready to give up more? Because obviously it didn't work the first time. That's what working out salvation with fear and trembling. It was sanctification. It was sanctification, thinking about, what do I need to do to work this out of me?
It starts with this commandment I give you, that you love one another. And if that love is emitting from you, it precludes a lot of bad things that can happen in life. You're putting others before yourself. And that's the distinction and the comparison with Christ.
It does when you've had the life you've had. And that's the big difference. Because think about where the church was 70, 80 years ago, before most of us, with a couple of exceptions, might have been born. Because that crowd is what we came into. There was the expectation of intentional striving for rightness for God. You understood. Anybody who had a mom get sick, there was food in the house within 3 days for the next month, because they knew Marcia Kelly is in the hospital with whatever. Marcia Kelly just got sick. Dick does not know how to fix anything. He will burn boiling water. Not going to happen the right way. And yes, he totally destroyed hot dogs. You'd think that'd be easy enough, but my dad couldn't handle it. So anytime my mom was sick, our freezer was packed. Our refrigerator was packed, because the brothers and sisters were ready to step up to help. Let alone if there was a baby or a funeral. Heaven help you, because you didn't have enough freezers to hold everything that came. That was a different time. Nowadays, we'll post that schedule online of, here's their food preferences, here are the days of the week we'd like to fill up the next 2 to 3 weeks. And you'll see 5 people, sometimes in congregations of 300 to 400, that will sign up. 3 of them for the first week, 2 of them in the second week. And you have to scratch your head and go, what in the world's coming off? What happened, I already said. We practiced David Christianity. We didn't train up service. We did it ourselves. And fewer caught the idea. How many of David's kids caught it? I want to say 0, which is terrifying. Go ahead, Jim.
Well, I was just saying, like you say, 70, 80 years ago, I mean, you got to remember, this country itself was a totally different place.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, we didn't have the Fed sitting there giving people loans and stuff they couldn't afford.
Yep.
So people didn't have, 40-hour work. Actually, some people even had 60-hour work weeks back then.
Mm-hmm.
But they figured out back then that you're only going to get 40 hours. We're only going to give you 40 hours because the fact that, I mean, it was a good thing they did it. But for the most part, people, especially in areas you're talking about, these people didn't have 40-hour work weeks. Most of them were farmers and everything else. So being in church and everything else, and here someone was sick or something like that, yeah, they could all rally around it. They all had the time to do it. People today don't have time to do that stuff.
You know why I'm smiling? Because you just agreed with what I said.
Yeah.
The world changed, and the church changed with it. Before, God had dominion in the church. Unfortunately, it wasn't all the way in a lot of people. My parents, oh yeah, we're going to do door knocking. We, all of us. Oh, we're going to do VBS. That meant we. Mom was putting together puppets. We'd be doing the paper mache heads for the puppets because we were the ones that were going to have to be the puppeteers, putting our fingers up inside of the toilet bowl, that was good. Toilet paper rolls with the itty bitty heads on top. And if we didn't do it right, it was our hands that were going to suffer. We learned because if mom was doing anything with Sunday school or dad was doing it with Sunday school, we were the guinea pigs and we were the labor, getting it prepared. We were the only ones out of the congregation that I grew up in that came out of it alive. I can name off 2 people that are my peers. Actually, both of them are significantly older than me, that are either alive, but definitely spiritually alive. That's Marcy Ford and Debbie Hall, but I don't know what Debbie's married name is. Boom, I just gave it to you. The rest of them, dead, on drugs, multiple divorces, so far nowhere near a church. Their parents, to the day they died, all faithful. They all were David's. The dominion God desires from us is not just doing my little share. It's working that extra bit to impact all those who are important to me. And that important crowd should be growing beyond just family, to co-workers, to the cashier that you encounter at the grocery store, that recognizes you because they've seen you before, and they know you're one of the few people that actually will smile at me, instead of just being, okay, let's go, and ignore them as a human being. The dominion that we're talking about here, they needed to hear because of where they were at. Today, exact same boat. That dominion needs to start with the individuals, but grow beyond the individual outlook that David had.